can also, please, Vice President. Thank you. Yeah. Respected Sri Upamanyu Chatterjee, distinguished writer, scholar, and one of the finest minds of modern India, Dr. Madhav Kaushikji, President Sahitya Academy, Professor Kumar Sharmaji, Vice President Sahitya Academy, and friends. I'm glad to welcome all of you for this edition of Samvatsar lecture. This is the 38th edition of Samvatsar lecture, barring 1 year in 2021 when we could not organize it due to lockdown restrictions because of the pandemic. We have organized it every year since 1986. Over the years, Samvatsar lecture have charmed and impacted many people in diverse ways. These are annual lectures where the Academy would invite a distinguished scholar to talk about subjects that reflect a deep concern for values or about a literary trend or a great classics or about any such topic that would open up new vistas of thinking. We have been fortunate to get so many great minds to deliver these lectures and privileged to listen to golden words of wisdom from them. Truly, these great minds have opened up new vistas of thinking, inspired many to venture into newer paths, and have helped us in learning more. Some of the scholars who have graced this platform in the past are S.H. Vatsayan Agyaya, K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar, K. Shivaram Karanth, Vinda Karindikar, Sitakant Mahapatra, Nirmal Verma, M.T. Vasudevan Nair, Vijay Tendulkar, C.D. Narasimhaya, U.R. Anantamurthy, Amitav Ghosh, Girish Karnad, Manoj Das, S.L. Bhairappa, Ramachandra Guha, Justice Dharmadhikari Guljar, and Justice Deepak Mishra. We are grateful to all of them for the paucity of time. I have just mentioned only a handful of names. Today, Sri Upamanyu Chatterjee will be speaking on some things to talk about. This is a very unique topic that he has chosen. This is a highly thought-provoking subject. From the ancient times till date, people always share their stories, their thoughts, emotions, feelings, experiences, etc. This is one human activity that has been a constant over centuries. It may be a constant, but we need mirrors, philosophical masters to prod us to reflect and introspect on our own lives and improve the quality of our own lives. Today, communication has become instant, discussions are frequent, and so are the questions. Every now and then, societies reshape themselves and their paradigms. But where are we going with all this? That is a question. Now, are we at the juncture where we are going to reshape many institutions such as democracy, family, caste, marriage, etc.? Again, that is a question. This is where we need distinguished minds like Sri Upamanyu Chatterjee ji to provide us tools to introspect and improve ourselves. Like all of you, I'm also very eager to listen to Sri Upamanyu Chatterjee. And as all of you know, that Upamanyu Chatterjee is a distinguished writer and scholar. He is the author of Lorenzo Searches for the Meaning of Life, Villainy, Fairy Tales at 50, Way to God, Weight Loss, The Memories of the Welfare State, The Last Burden, and English August, An Indian Story, all novels. The Assassination of Indira Gandhi, a collection of long stories, and The Hush of the Uncaring Sea is a collection of novellas that is forthcoming. He won the Sahitya Academy Award in 2000 and the JCB Prize in 2024. In 2008, he was awarded the Order of Officier des Arts et des Lettres by the French government for his contribution to literature. The novel Way to Go was shortlisted for the Hindu Best Fiction Award. With these few words, I am glad to welcome all of you for this year's Samvatsar lecture by Sri Upamanyu Chatterjee ji. Thank you all. Now I will hand over the mic to Sri Upamanyu Chatterjee.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rao. Um, I had originally titled the talk something to talk about because I actually had nothing to talk about. And I thought that would incite me into thinking of a topic. I thought that perhaps I was expected to talk about the experience of writing in English. And I thought, well, why not? President of the Academy, Shri Kaushik, Madam Vice President, Secretary Dr. Rao, fellow lovers of literature. It is only appropriate to begin this year's Samvatsar lecture with a quotation from an earlier president of the Academy. In his foreword to the series of published lectures, Vinayak Krishna Gokak says, these lectures should reflect a deep concern for values. They should open up new vistas of regarding, sorry, am I not audible? Okay. They should open up new vistas of thinking regarding a literary movement, a current literary trend, some original thinking about a great writer or a great classic or a new path in literary criticism. So I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you all. My values might not be yours, and even if they do coincide, mine just might not have the required depth. And as for those new vistas of thinking, I don't think I've had regional thought in my life. Anything that emerges, it's true actually for almost all of us, anything that emerges from my head has usually had a provenance elsewhere in things that I have seen or read and heard. And more often than not, it's usually in a text. And so I thought that this evening I could chat to you most informally about what I've been reading, my experience of books, reminisce about some writers that I have had the fortune to meet, and place before you my thoughts, all unoriginal, on what it means to be a writer of English fiction in India. I read English for 5 years here at the University of Delhi and taught the subject for 1 year. In those 6 years, I'm particularly grateful to have been given the opportunity to read three seminal texts that might otherwise have escaped my radar. I speak of Henry David Thoreau's Walden, Wordsworth's The Prelude in its 1805 Avatar, and Melville's Moby Dick. These texts captivated me, but what I found on the flip side, what I found utterly mystifying, with an intensity stronger than the worth of these three works, is the number of strange texts that we had to read in those 5 years. The list is long. There was The Shoemaker's Holiday by one Thomas Dekker, Spenser's The Faerie Queene, the plays of Etheridge and Congreve, the Roger de Coverley papers from The Spectator, Plutarch's Roman Lives in Sir Thomas North's translation, Dr. Samuel Johnson's Rasselas, T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral, and most incomprehensible of all, in the very first year, 5 texts from ancient Greek in translation. Because logically, in an English literature course, if you can include ancient Greek texts, then you can very well include texts, translation, from Russian, Spanish, Sanskrit, Tamil, particularly to replace rather trite, forgettable plays and prose works from 17th, 18th century England. Well, 50 years is a long time. That English course has no doubt changed in those decades. But that is not my concern here. When I was studying the subject, my concern was, now what is this guy saying? It is not an invalid approach to literature and to reading books. Fundamentally, what is this, for example, Edmund Spenser saying? Beyond the images and metaphors and sprung rhythms and Spenserian stanzas, what's he up to? That's really the question for any reader reading any text. I count myself fortunate in that when I gave up teaching to become a civil servant, I did not give up reading. Fiction, non-fiction, history, geopolitics, all the heavy stuff. The question over the years changed. Now, what is this guy saying it came to me with an irrevocable sense of my increasing impatience with books. The question became, what is this guy saying to me? Or to rephrase the question, who out there writes for me? And I found that the answer was not the writers that you've been reading. My favorite writers of those days, Graham Greene, Evelyn Waugh, Aldous Huxley. It is so obvious, and yet it took me so long to grasp that they write naturally for readers vaguely like themselves. They might set their books in Mexico, the Congo, Tangier, Haiti, but their subject matter is the Englishness of the displaced, dislocated Englishman, which is, as it should be, of course, roughly 130 million speakers of English with varying degrees of fluency in India, which is approximately twice the population of the United Kingdom. Well, if they are that keen, those 130 million people, if they are that keen to read English fiction, they can just go ahead and write it themselves. One has to convey in a language that is not one's own the spirit that is one's own. One has to convey various shades and omissions of a certain thought movement that looks maltreated in an alien language. I use the word alien, yet English is not really an alien language to us. We are instinctively bilingual, many of us writing in our own language and in English. We cannot write like the English. We should not. That isn't me. That is Raja Rao voicing his disquiet in 1974. Well, the decades have passed since then, and that old unease has been subsumed in other anxieties. The typical upmarket bookshop now devotes several shelves to books written in English by fellow Indians. About their quality, we should simply keep quiet. Time has a way of gently compelling the Z-grade stuff to sink. The obvious needs to be stated here that there exist in India several gradations of English. One will speak one kind, very basic, when, for example, one is buying cigarettes in a part of the country where, for example, they don't speak Hindi and you don't speak the language they speak. Between that basic use of the language and the use of literary English to write fiction, to create image and metaphor and convey some complex thought, lies an immense gulf. Raja Rao, I think, must have meant that that second literary version of the language is fundamentally alien to the country. But I find, perhaps because he is right, that literary language facilitates the use of irony. It provides detachment. It produces a distancing effect, all of which, but only for a particular bent of mind and a particular kind of story, are essential tools. My mother tongue is Bangla, is Bengali. I used to speak it with my parents. After they died, I found no one whom I could speak it with. My brothers and I speak English. My Bengali friends and I speak English. For years, literally, for years, I would look at the several shelves of Bengali books that my parents left behind and wonder who would ever read them. And one day, some 20 years ago, I answered myself, then why not you, you fool? And so I began, armed with two dictionaries, Bengali to English, English to Bengali, and whenever possible, an English translation of the text I was reading. Never, or almost never, a good translation, but any translation is better than none. It is difficult, I'm still going to try, it is difficult for me to try and describe the experience of reading in your mother tongue for the first time at the age of 45, and of approaching its books with your head weighed down with the baggage of an Occidental literature. The layered irony, for example, of Rabindranath's genteel Bhadralok voice in Gora, that unfortunately that translation did not catch, made me rack my brains for days trying to pin down a comparable voice in the English books that I had read. Thackeray, no. Rabindranath is far less flamboyant. George Eliot, no. I'll wait, is that George Eliot? No. Even though I've seen Gora being compared to Middlemarch, a juxtaposition that does little justice to either, it took me a while to realize what should have been obvious from the very first, that each literature, each language has its own cultural tradition. This is so obvious, and yet it's possible that it just doesn't enter your head. That each literature, each language has its own cultural tradition, and to look for influences that leap across oceans and generations can be hazardous indeed. And yet I couldn't help snatching at similarities of voice and tone during my reading of these seminal Bengali texts, which itself was an enormous pleasure, but perhaps misleading. Thus, Vibhuti Bhushan's Pather Panchali immediately was, for me, an intimation of immortality from recollections of early childhood. And it's actually paradise regained through memory. That kind of comparison, even if it doesn't do justice to the book, gives you focus when you're reading a book in which you have almost no experience of the tradition. Not to speak of, তেমনি দেখেছি তারে অন্ধকারে, বলেছে সে এতদিন কোথায়। This is জীবনানন্দ Bengali is my second language. English remains my first. That is not something I am particularly proud of. It's just an accident of personal history. I studied in a convent school, and I went to a convent school because my brother went to it. I grew up in Delhi, where you buy your cigarettes in Hindi and your fellow citizens cannot pronounce your first name. It's a matter, it's a fact that I heard, it's a fact that I heard Upamanyu being pronounced easily when I started working in Maharashtra in 1983. It's a fact. Anyway, that's completely irrelevant. So Hindi I've learned and studied formally, cleared exams in it even, and as a civil servant, wrote notes in government files for several long years with perfect ease. There isn't much to writing notes in government files. So, though I must confess, I began reading Hindi literature only after I began reading Bengali, and that too because I had the good fortune sometime in 2005 or 6 to be part of a literary junket with a group of other Indian writers. There were about 20 of us. The group included 3 people with whom I got on. Well, I think I got on particularly well. There was Mahashita Devi, there was Nirmal Verma, and Krishna Baldev Ved. And after meeting them, I thought, they were just such great, there was such just great I mean, Nirmal was very reticent, but even then, after you sort of got to know him, it was only thereafter, almost sort of abashed at not having thought of it and got down to it before, that I began reading. I read Nirmal Verma's Prague stories. I read Krishna Baldev Ved's Uska Bachpan. I didn't need translations. So here I am in my mid-60s, reading regularly and quite happy with it in 3 languages, and thus with no time to look at the junk on my, for example, on my mobile phone. So does this lecture this year have a point? Yeah, does the Samvatsar lecture this year have a point? Are all these personal reminiscences, this rambling, going to lead somewhere? Well, they are leading to yet another quotation. The marriage of English and the languages of India has made, and this time it's Anthony Burgess, has made a whole language, complete with the colloquialisms of Calcutta and London, Shakespearean archaisms, bazaar whinings, references to the Hindu pantheon, the jargon of Indian litigation, shrill Babu irritability, all together. It is not pure English, but it's like the English of Shakespeare, of Joyce, and Kipling, gloriously impure, unquote. In all the colleges and universities across India, instead of the staid and fundamentally irrelevant Eng-Lit course, why are we Indians not studying Indian English? Or what should more trenchantly, more accurately be called, why are we not studying English in India? What is English in India? What is the study of a language without a study of its roots, its growth, its development? A 3 or 5 year course in English in India would cover its literature, its language, its influences, its eccentricities, and most of all, its history. The infamous Macaulay, who proposed the creation of a class that may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinion, in morals, and in intellect. Macaulay cannot be ignored. Neither can the stalwarts of the nationalist movement, who were educated both here and in England, in English. Nor can we ignore the fact that the medium of nationalist opposition was English. That cannot be gainsaid either. And I personally find it shocking that a modern, educated Indian can consider himself modern and educated if he has not read or, in fact, studied the language debates in our constitutional assembly. Essential reading, essential learning, and put it into a course. English in India, my idea of a course called English in India will cover the syntax and grammar of global English. It will have a course in Indian English, not to correct its idiosyncrasies, but to understand them, their roots, and their necessity. We are like this only. Where does that come from? Which language are we constructing that in and then translating it? I'm having tummy upset instead of I am ill. Well, if that more accurately describes your physical condition, well, why not? A special paper on difficult international prose stylists. A paragraph from one of the books I found incredibly difficult to read, Naked Lunch, a paragraph from Naked Lunch, a paragraph from a Henry James preface. Why is their prose so difficult? Comprehension, no one does that anymore, but it's essential. Why is their prose so difficult? What are they trying to hide? And last of all, classes in contemporary comparative literature. The student will also opt for an Indian language and study it with as much care for 3 years, for 5 years, as much care as he devotes to English. We are all tri, sometimes sporadically quadrilingual. Why lose the advantage? Each of those languages is a window to a mansion of riches, and it is yours to live in. Thank you for your attention.
Very brief but very thought-provoking lecture. And as I said, this is something to talk about. Or do you have any something to say or something to ask? Anyone has any questions about his lecture? They're welcome to come over here and ask very briefly, but don't give a lecture again on his lecture. Just ask a question, anything, kindly. One by one, please. That mic will come to you, kindly.
Mr. Chatterjee, we enjoyed your talk very much, but I would request you to throw light on your English August novel and how it was made into a movie. And second thing, I understand you live in Sri Lanka, or you spent some time in Sri Lanka. I mean, why you decided to sort of live in Sri Lanka? First of all, I stand corrected if I'm mistaken. But I will request you to throw more light on English August and how it was made into a movie. Thank you.
Well, I don't stay in Sri Lanka anymore, if that. Okay, what question one? English August is, well, the filmmaker phoned me out of the blue one day and said, I like this book, I'd like to make a film. And I said, sure. I mean, and then he took several years. It takes a very, very long time to make a film because it takes a very long time to make a film. He's, getting funding and so on. So I think it took about 5 or 6 years before he could actually make the film. We wrote the screenplay. And does that answer your question? Chalu hai.
Namaskar, sir. I'm Dr. B.K. Tiwari, and this is coincidence. I'm from English literature. 40 years before, when I was in Ranchi University, my professor, Dr. D.K. Chakravarti, referred you while talking theory of fiction in English literature. So it is very much inspiring. It is an intellectual upliftment to listen you, sir. This is a mesmerizing experience, but there is lacking India or Indianism in your works. Just Englishman everywhere. This I feel, sir. So, just say whenever we read Rabindranath or anywhere, so absolute India is everywhere, sir. So that should be reflected. I expect, sir.
Thank you. I'll keep that in mind when I write my next book. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
My question is in two parts. What you proposed, would you still call it English, not English as we've studied it, the language of the Englishman? What would you call it?
I still call it English in India. I used this just as a, uh, what's it called?
To stir up some thoughts.
Well, it's worth it, I think, because it will cover the usual ground, and instead of the boring texts that I mentioned, you read texts. In fact, the only thing that interests me, if I spend half an hour thinking about it, I'll probably get an answer. The thing that interests me is English fiction in India and English poetry. Are in very good shape.
But-
English drama in India is a bit wobbly,
But English writers from India, are they considered English writers or Indian writers?
that depends on whoever is writing the newspaper or magazine article. I don't care.
Hello, sir. I would like to ask you, like I, as a child, read a number of books in translation of Chandra Chatterjee, and I could read a streak of feminism in his novels, which no one has marveled so far. So, what is your take on Chand's literature, if I may ask you?
I confess, once I started reading in Bengali and in Hindi, I don't read books in those languages in translation. And haven't got down to Sharat Chandra yet. It'll take me, I hope to. So I can't actually answer this, but I mean, it's obvious that one can't read in all the Indian languages. I enjoy it very much. Just as an example, I think I've answered your question in the sense I'm not going to read Sharat Chandra in English, and I will get down to Sharat Chandra in the future. But for example, I don't think I'll ever read Malayalam in the original. But I wanted to when I was reading Legend of Kazakh. I said, I read this English version. I said, the original must just be so much better. But there it is. It's nice when you have no chance of reading the original text. It's nice to read a translation. Having said that, I should add that no matter how good the translation, it'll never be. It'll never be. Which is why I think it's so unfair when it's part of the colonial experience. This, where English is at the apex, at the summit of the pyramid of languages. But that's because we are ex-colonials. I remember I saw Hamlet, the text, in French. It's nothing. I mean, I read it. I did some French. It is nothing. I mean, there's nothing in it. It's just like just another play. So ditto, when you think of More Than War and Peace, there's this long story by Tolstoy called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which mind expanding. And of course, I read it in English, and I said, I'll never be able to read this in Russian, but so what? At least I managed to read it in some form or the other. So Sharat Chandra, it's pity. I'll get down to it. Yeah.
I too am an English professor, retired, taught in universities. As an English teacher, I'm concerned whenever I hear that Indian English needs to be taught. I feel that I think I won't be wrong if I say you and I learned to write English in an Indian way because we learned English in all its basic qualities and correctness. So, as school teachers, for example, how do you tell them, teach students Indian English as it figures in our Indian writing in English? Language is actually an evolving thing and it can be personalized by any writer. So even now there is a new word, Ukrained. So I'm just wondering whether this will be a practical approach, because learning English has now become a must for students to survive in this globalized world, in this digitalized world. So how do you look at it, not only as a writer, but from the point of view of teaching English as part of curriculum and to the students?
I think I didn't make myself clear. I just presume that there will be teachers who will teach them their Renan Martin. I mean, you cannot begin with Indian English from day one. And in fact, now that you've said this, I mean, quality of English writing, journalism is so poor. Because why? It's not the fault of Indian English. It's because no one is teaching them Renan Martin. Not only that, when we read Renan Martin in school, it had everything in it. No, I'm sorry, because our daughters, I saw their Renan Martin, they've just removed huge chunks of it. It's been reprinted, removed this, they removed that. So I said, where are the gerunds? What's a gerund? Where is the rest of it? Ours was this kind of fat tome. So you have, I mean, obviously, if you're studying Indian English, by which I mean not grammatically incorrect English, what I mean is Indian English, English as it is used in India. But it will obviously mean, and in fact, I didn't spell it out because I said this will get too boring. I mean, you take a newspaper. I'm sorry to be parochial. The only newspaper that used to write correct English was the Statesman, and to some extent the Hindu. The rest of them, my God! In fact, in any class, you should take a newspaper and say, "Okay, here, read this paragraph and tell me how many grammatical mistakes you can find." That's the kind you need to teach them. I mean, we all have met MPhil students who don't know their language. So, Indian English is as English exists, evolves in our country. The quality of English in the computer stuff that people read, I mean, it's so poor, but no one seems to care. Oh, because we don't have the time. All that needs to be taught, but it has to be taught which is true for all languages. It's not as though Hindi. Even our Hindi teachers were very poor. But then my Hindi was poor too in school, so we didn't care. But it's something you just force yourself to learn.
Hello, sir. It's a wonderful session. I want to ask that most of the times, as you also said, that we cannot read any other languages which we are not comfortable with, like other regional languages. So we usually go for the translation. So what would you say about as a writer or as a reader also, that how authentic it would be, or is it there that sometimes translation is better than the original or original is better than the translation? What's your take on this?
I can't think of a translation better than the original. I still remember reading one English translation of Dostoevsky, and the reviewer, complete idiot, he must be. Oh, this is better than. I think it was Crime and Punishment. This is better than. I mean, it can never be. You might find perfect. You might the language. It's true that the language into which you translate had better be better than your knowledge of the original, because you need that facility in the translated language, in the language into which you are translating. But those nuances, you need to know in all the languages. So it's not as though I mean, as I said earlier, it's better than it's better having a translation than none at all. But I mean, now that you've set me off, I didn't mention it because I found Anandamot, which is the first Bengali, which is I read after. I found it shocking in its right-wing nationalism. I mean, I said, oh my God, how can? But at least he was direct. But the first translation of Anandamot that I read, there's one by an American called Julius Lipner, which is very good, which is, you know, a lesson in love. He's really worked at it. But there is one by some Bengali teacher in some university in America where he's removed all the references to Muslims and put in the British. And there's no one there to correct him, to say that that's not there in the original. Because at the end of it, Bankim Chandra is vaguely sort of pro-British, if anything. And that's maybe because he was the deputy collector. Sorry. but there it is. It's what it's. But these things you'll never, unless you know both the languages, you'll never get to know all this. But that kind of thing can be dangerous too. But still, if you can read in as many languages as you can, there's nothing like it. Which is. I mean, I'm simplifying matters because, I mean, I find, as I said, I read some French, so I tried my luck. I read French translation, very boring, of Proust. Then I read the original. As we say in Hindi, "Jaan nikal gayi." It's just the language is so difficult, even with dictionaries and so on. So it's you need to know your limits as well. That's why Jivanananda was. I was very proud of having read and having understood the original poems. Great fun. Sorry.
We are talking translations. If you, an English writer, if you're given a choice, which is the first language you would want your writings to be translated into? A European language, an Indian
Yeah, without a
language?
doubt. I mean, I haven't. There have been a couple of translations into European languages of 2 or 3 of my books. No, here, in fact, I tried myself, inspired by my success in reading Bengali. I tried to translate English August into Bengali. I gave up at line 4 or 5. I just couldn't. It's very tough. As I said, you need to know the language into which you're translating much better than you know the original. It's not easy at all. It's very tough, in fact. Sorry. Yeah, because that world is familiar, isn't it? I mean, in the sense that, for example, English August is not a clean book. It's full of obscenities. The French translation, which is quite popular, has bowdlerized it. All the dirty stuff, has been removed. They found dirty enough, but cleaner French phrasings for the original. So, well, better than nothing. But people who've read the English say that, oh my God, this is not the correct translation. It should be, etc. That's a universal story for anyone. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful lecture and also very live and vibrant question answer session. So we hope you will always accept our academy's invitations and please come because he always stays in abroad these days. Last year also he came from Sri Lanka, this time from Brazil. Thank you so much. Thank you all of you and good night, Subhratri. And tomorrow we'll meet here again in our regular sessions.